The Imperium of man did not begin with noble angels descending from the heavens. It began with monsters screaming themselves to death beneath a poisoned sky. Before the Legions Astartes, before the Primarchs, before the lie of divine destiny. There were the Thunder Warriors. They were not heroes. They were not failures. They were weapons built to be discarded, and their fate exposes the Emperor of mankind more clearly than any heresy ever could. Terra during the Unification Wars was not a world worth saving. It was a fractured corpse of a planet, carved into techno-barbarian fiefdoms ruled by warlords who wielded forbidden archaeotech, gene-forged armies, scrap-code intelligences, and weapons salvaged from the ruins of the dark age of technology. Humanity was eating itself alive. There was no Imperium, there was no future. There was only endless war, and the Emperor knew that perfection would not win it. What he required was speed, brutality, overwhelming force unconcerned with longevity. Thus, the Thunder Warriors were born. They were created beneath the Himalayan mountains in hidden gene forges where ethics were irrelevant and time was the only enemy. Their augmentation was crude compared to later Astartes standards, but vastly more aggressive. Their musculature was overbuilt to the point of self-destruction. Their bones reinforced beyond natural limits. Their organs forced to output far beyond sustainable thresholds. Their minds hardwired for violence and obedience, but never stability. They were not designed to live long enough to question their purpose. They were designed to kill everything in front of them until nothing remained. The Thunder Warriors were taller than baseline humans, broader, heavier, and monstrously strong. Their armor was brutal and inelegant, closer to walking tanks than the ceramite elegance of later Space Marines. They carried weapons meant to shatter armies, not win wars of ideology. And most importantly, they were unstable. Their genetic degradation was not a tragic oversight. It was intentional. The Emperor needed soldiers who could be produced rapidly and deployed immediately, not warriors meant to endure centuries of service. The Unification Wars were not a crusade of enlightenment. They were a slaughter. Thunder Warriors smashed through the Pan-Pacific Empire, butchered the Nord-Afric conclaves, broke the last techno-sorcerer kings of old Albia, and crushed gene-wrought tyrants who ruled over continents of enslaved humanity. Wherever they marched, civilization ended so that a new one could be built atop the ruins. They were unstoppable, they were loyal, and they were dying. Even at the height of their victories, Thunder Warriors began to fail. Their bodies broke down, their organs malfunctioned, their minds fractured under the strain of constant war and genetic instability. Some suffered catastrophic cellular collapse. Others descended into berserk fury or sudden cognitive degradation. But they continued to fight. They always continued to fight. Loyalty was burned into them as deeply as their rage. And this is where the tragedy begins. Because the Thunder Warriors believed they were fighting to build a future they would live to see. They were wrong. The Emperor was already moving on. Even as Thunder Warriors bled for Terra, the Legiones Astartes were being refined. Slower to create, more stable, capable of indoctrination, cultural identity, and long-term strategic obedience. The Space Marines were not merely soldiers. They were instruments of empire. The Thunder Warriors were instruments of annihilation. This distinction matters because the Thunder Warriors knew too much. They remembered the Emperor as a warlord, not a god. They remembered him walking among them, not enthroned as a distant myth. They remembered a time before the Imperium, before the ecclesiarchy, before the great lie that this empire was built on hope. They were incompatible with the future narrative. The moment Terra was unified, their fate was sealed. Mount Ararat was not a battle, it was an execution. The Thunder Warriors were summoned under the pretense of final victory celebrations, of honor, of recognition for their service. Instead, they were surrounded by the Custodian Guard and the 1st Space Marines. What followed was systematic extermination. Not chaotic slaughter, but controlled annihilation. The Emperor's most loyal warriors were erased by his most perfect creations. The Custodes were chosen for a reason. They were incorruptible, utterly loyal to the Emperor alone, and capable of killing Thunder Warriors efficiently. There would be no hesitation, no sympathy, no rebellion. The Thunder Warriors fought back, of course. Some resisted, some fled, some begged. None were spared. The official records barely acknowledge this event. The Imperium does not commemorate Mount Ararat. It does not teach this history, because this was the moment the Emperor revealed the true nature of his rule. Loyalty did not guarantee survival. Service did not earn mercy. Utility was the only measure of worth. And yet, not all Thunder Warriors died. A handful survived, broken, degenerating, hiding in the underhives of Terra, clinging to failing bodies and fading memories. Some attempted to rebuild themselves with forbidden science. Some sold their services as mercenaries. Some simply waited to die. Their existence is deeply inconvenient to Imperial doctrine because they prove intent. They prove that the Thunder Warriors were not phased out due to unforeseen flaws. They were hunted because they were obsolete. The contrast between Thunder Warriors and Space Marines is not simply technological, it is ideological. Thunder Warriors were honest in their brutality. They knew they were weapons. They did not cloak themselves in notions of honor or eternal duty. Space Marines, by contrast, were given myths, rituals, heraldry, and brotherhood. They were taught to believe in the Imperium as an ideal, not merely obey it. This made them controllable in the long term. The Thunder Warriors were too raw, too real, too close to the truth. This is the point where we must pause and consider the implications. Because if the Emperor could do this to his first and most loyal warriors, then the Imperium's foundation is not sacrifice, it is betrayal. And here, quietly, without breaking the tone or pace, I want to ask you something worth considering as you watch this unfold. If the Imperium erased the Thunder Warriors this completely, what other truths do you think were buried to preserve the myth? Let me know your thoughts in the comments because this question echoes through everything that comes after. The Thunder Warriors were not a mistake. They were a prototype in the truest sense, not of technology, but of policy. They were proof that the Emperor was willing to burn entire generations to achieve his vision. This pattern repeats. The Primarchs, the legions, the Imperial army, entire worlds, sacrificed for compliance. The Thunder Warriors were simply the first. The Horus heresy is often framed as the great betrayal, the moment everything went wrong. But that is a comforting lie. The true betrayal occurred long before, when the Emperor decided that history itself could be rewritten if it was inconvenient. When he chose myth over memory, when he chose stability over truth, the Thunder Warriors would not have fit into the Great Crusade. They could not be sent into the stars as symbols of humanity's rebirth. They were too monstrous, too unstable, too honest. They were reminders of a time when survival demanded brutality, and the Imperium does not like to remember that it was forged in blood, rather than destiny. In the end, the Thunder Warriors achieved everything they were created to do. Terra was unified. The Emperor ascended. The Imperium was born, and for that success, they were erased. Their bones lie beneath the foundations of the Imperial Palace. Their names are lost. Their story survives only in fragments, whispers, and the quiet horror of what their fate reveals. Because if the Imperium was willing to kill its first defenders to preserve a narrative, then the question is not whether it will do so again. The question is how many times it already has. The Thunder Warriors were never meant to live, and that truth should terrify you far more than their failure ever could.